The engine room fell silent for the 11th time that day, and Admiral Sarah Voss stood on the catwalk above it with her arms crossed, watching 200 contracted mechanics fail to explain why a $70 million warship refused to breathe. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the hum of the dock lights and the distant slap of harbor water against the hull. A man in a gray coverall stood near the back of the crowd, holding a mop bucket, waiting for permission to clean a floor nobody was using. If you've ever been the only person in the room who actually understood what was going on and had to watch everyone else pretend otherwise, stay with this one until the end, because this one earns it. 10 weeks earlier, Daniel Reyes had been exactly where he was supposed to be, which was nowhere important. He mopped the No. 2 dry dock at Belhaven Naval Yard from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, 5 days a week. And he did it the way he did everything, which was thoroughly and without complaint. He was 41 years old. He had a 9-year-old daughter named Mia who liked to sit on the kitchen counter while he made her breakfast and quiz him on state capitals, mostly because she knew all of them and he sometimes didn't, and she liked to be the one who was right. He had once been something else entirely. For 6 years, Daniel had been the lead propulsion systems engineer on the Javelin-class destroyer program, back when it was still a prototype, back when the whole thing lived on whiteboards and stress test reports, and long nights in a lab with 3 other engineers who understood exactly what he meant when he said a fuel line was singing wrong. Then the contract changed hands. Meridian Defense Dynamics won the sustainment bid, promised the Navy a 30% cost reduction, and delivered it by replacing Daniel's team with an overseas engineering contractor that billed a third of the rate and had never once stood inside the hull of a ship they were certifying. Daniel didn't fight it. There wasn't anything to fight. His severance letter was polite. It used the phrase workforce optimization twice. He took the only job the yard would still give a man with his security clearance and his history, which was cleaning the same dry docks where his engines used to get built. He never told anyone what he used to be, not the other cleaners, not his supervisor, not even Mia, who thought her father had always pushed a mop for a living, and who loved him anyway, which was, as far as Daniel was concerned, the only resume that had ever mattered. He watched the destroyer program continue without him from a distance of about 40 feet, and one massive drop in institutional memory. The ship in question was called the USS Halcyon Ridge, hull number 1 of a planned 12-ship order, and it was supposed to be the Navy's answer to a decade of aging destroyer fleets. Meridian Defense Dynamics had built it, tested it, and scheduled it for sea trials under Admiral Sarah Voss, a woman who had spent 28 years in the fleet and did not have a reputation for patience with excuses. Voss had inherited command of the trial group 8 months earlier, after her predecessor retired, and she had inherited, along with it, a program that looked immaculate on paper and increasingly unstable in practice. 3 weeks before the trial, the Halcyon Ridge's main propulsion system had failed a diagnostic startup sequence. Meridian's engineering director, a man named Gordon Ashcroft, had assured her it was a sensor calibration issue, nothing structural, nothing that would delay the schedule. Ashcroft had the kind of voice that made problems sound smaller than they were. He wore his shirts a size 2 fitted and his hair combed with enough product to survive a hurricane. And he had a habit of saying words like optimized and streamlined in board meetings the way other people said please and thank you. He had also, quietly and without much fanfare, been the executive who signed off on replacing Daniel's team 2 years earlier. Voss did not know that yet. What Voss knew was that her ship would not start. The morning of the failed trial, she stood in the control room of the Halcyon Ridge and watched the readouts flatline during ignition sequence for the second time in a week. The lead engine had turned over, coughed, and gone still, the way an old truck does in cold weather, except this was a warship that had cost the taxpayers $70 million and was supposed to be the most advanced platform in its class. Ashcroft stood beside her, arms folded, watching his team of 200 contracted mechanics swarm the engine bay like they were trying to solve a puzzle by sheer population density. "It's a wiring harness issue," Ashcroft said. "We've isolated it to 3 possible failure points. We'll have a fix by end of day." He had said this on Monday. It was now Thursday. Voss said nothing. She had learned, over 28 years, that the men who explained the least often knew the most, and the men who explained the most, especially in confident, rounded paragraphs, were usually explaining around something. By the fourth day, the Navy's program office had called Voss directly. The Undersecretary's office was not interested in excuses. There was budget language currently being drafted that would cancel the remaining 11 ships in the Halcyon Ridge order if this first hull could not demonstrate basic propulsion reliability within the week. 2 years of inter-service politics, congressional lobbying, and fleet modernization planning were balanced on top of an engine that would not turn over. Voss stood on the dock that afternoon, watching Ashcroft's mechanics disassemble a fuel manifold for the third time, and felt something she rarely let herself feel in public, which was doubt. That was when she noticed the man with the mop bucket. He wasn't looking at his mop. He was looking at the open engine access hatch, at the specific angle where 2 technicians were arguing about a torque reading, and his eyes moved the way a man's eyes move when he is reading something the rest of the room cannot see. Voss watched him for 11 seconds before she said anything. Do you need something?" Daniel set the bucket down. "No, ma'am, just waiting for the bay to clear." "You've been standing there a while." "I have," he said. He didn't offer more than that, which was, in its own way, unusual. Most people around Voss offered more than that. She studied him for a moment. Coveralls, grease-scuffed boots, a security badge clipped at chest height that read maintenance, contracted, and nothing else. "You have an opinion about my engine," she said. It wasn't a question. Daniel hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but out of the practiced caution of a man who had learned exactly what happened to people who spoke out of turn in rooms like this one. "I might," he said. Ashcroft, hearing this exchange from across the bay, walked over with the particular gait of a man protecting territory. "Admiral, this is one of our janitorial contractors. I don't think he's cleared for—" "I didn't ask you," Voss said, without looking at him. The engine bay went quiet, in the way rooms do when a hierarchy has just been publicly rearranged, like furniture moved without warning, and everyone has to relearn where the walls are. Voss turned back to Daniel. "What's your name?" "Daniel Reyes." "All right, Daniel Reyes, tell me what you see." He walked to the access hatch. He didn't ask permission from the mechanic standing there, and they, sensing something in the Admiral's tone, stepped aside without being told twice. Daniel crouched at the engine bay's fuel intake assembly and ran 2 fingers along a coupling joint near the base of the primary line. He didn't touch anything with force. He touched it the way a doctor touches a bruise, testing for the exact point where the give became wrong. "Your intake valve's been reseated at the wrong angle," he said. "Somebody serviced this line and torqued the flange down before checking the alignment pin. It's off by maybe 4 degrees. Doesn't sound like much. It's enough that under ignition pressure, the seal doesn't seat evenly, and the system reads it as a stall fault and shuts itself down before it can flood the chamber." Ashcroft laughed, short and dismissive. "That's not consistent with our diagnostic data." "Your diagnostic data is looking at the sensor readout," Daniel said, "not the valve itself." Voss crouched beside him, close enough to see what he was pointing at. "Show me." Daniel traced the misalignment with his finger, explaining the geometry the way a man explains something he has explained many times before, in a life that had apparently included a great deal more of this than his coveralls suggested. Voss looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Ashcroft. "How long would a permanent fix take?" "We'd need the part flown in from the manufacturer," Ashcroft said quickly. 2, maybe 3 days. And that's if the coupling ships express from—" "I didn't ask him," Voss said again. Daniel reached into his coverall pocket and produced, of all things, a rubber band. Thick, industrial grade, the kind used to bundle cable runs. "This won't fix it," he said, "but it'll hold the seal tight enough to get you through an ignition test, buys you time to get the part in properly instead of grounding the whole trial." He wound the rubber band twice around the loose coupling, cinched it against a lip in the housing that Voss wouldn't have noticed if she'd stared at it for an hour, and stood up. "Try it now." The room did not believe him. The room had spent 4 days and had brought in 200 professionals who did not believe him either. Voss believed him, or at least believed him enough to nod at the technician by the ignition panel. The sequence began. The low groan of turbines spinning up echoed through the hull, the sound every person in that bay had heard fail 6 times that week. The sound that had started to feel like it belonged to a ship that simply did not want to work. Then the engine caught. It did not cough. It did not stall. It thundered, low and even and full. The sound of $70 million finally doing what it was built to do. And the noise rolled through the dry dock and up through the catwalks and into the open harbor air. And for a moment, nobody in that engine bay said a single word. Voss looked at the readouts. Every line was green. She looked back at Daniel, who was already crouched down again, coiling his mop cord, as if he had not just solved in 11 minutes what 200 mechanics and a defense contractor had failed to solve in 4 days. "Who are you?" she said, and this time it was not a formality. Daniel straightened up. "I told you, Daniel Reyes." "That's your name. I'm asking who you are." He considered the question longer than she expected. "I used to be the lead propulsion engineer on this program," he said, "back when it was a prototype, before Meridian brought in cheaper contractors and let my whole team go." The silence that followed had a different quality than the one before it. Ashcroft's face had gone the particular shade of pale that happens when a man realizes a fact he thought was buried has just surfaced in front of the one person who could do something about it. "That's not accurate," Ashcroft said, too quickly. "That was a restructuring decision made well above my level that had nothing to do with—" "You signed the termination authorization," Daniel said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. March 14th. "I kept a copy." Voss looked between the two of them, and something in her expression shifted, the way water shifts when a stone finally breaks its surface, all that stillness giving way to motion underneath. "Mr. Reyes," she said, "would you be willing to come to my office tomorrow morning? I have a shift at 6. I'll clear it with your supervisor." Daniel glanced at Ashcroft, then back at Voss. "All right," he said. That night, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with a mug of coffee going cold beside a stack of old documents he hadn't touched in 2 years. Personnel files. Design schematics with his initials in the corner. A termination letter he had read so many times the fold lines had gone soft and gray. Mia sat across from him, doing homework, glancing up occasionally at the seriousness on her father's face. "You okay, Dad?" "I'm okay," he said, and he meant it, mostly. Just remembering some stuff from work. The mopping work or the old work? He looked up. She'd never asked him that before, in quite those words. Kids noticed more than people gave them credit for. "The old work," he admitted. "Was it good work?" "It was the best work I ever did." Mia nodded as if that settled something and went back to her homework, and Daniel sat there a while longer with his coffee and his old files, feeling something in his chest that he hadn't let himself feel in 2 years, which was something close to hope, small and cautious, like a door left slightly open in a house that had been locked for a long time. The next morning, Voss's office looked exactly like a room belonging to a woman who did not waste time on decoration. A single photograph of a ship, a framed commendation, a desk clear of everything except the file now sitting in the center of it, which had Daniel's name on the tab. "I had my staff pull your service record overnight," Voss said, once Daniel was seated across from her. 6 years on the Javelin-class prototype program, 2 patents on fuel delivery calibration, a commendation from the original program director for identifying a combustion timing flaw that would have failed structural certification. She looked up. "You designed half the system Meridian is currently failing to maintain." "I helped design it," Daniel said. "Wasn't just me." "Modesty is a fine quality, Mr. Reyes, but I'd like a straight answer. Did Meridian Defense Dynamics knowingly replace a qualified engineering team with a cheaper, less experienced one in order to inflate their margin on this contract?" Daniel considered the question the way he considered everything, carefully, without hurry. "I can't speak to what they knew," he said. "I can tell you what happened. My team was let go. The new team's been maintaining systems they never built and don't fully understand. What you saw yesterday isn't the first time that's caused a problem. It's just the first time it's caused one this big. Voss leaned back in her chair. I want you to walk the full propulsion system today, every subsystem. I want a written report of every deviation you find from original design spec, and I want you to flag anything Meridian's team has touched that concerns you. That's a big job for one day. You have until end of week. I'll clear you the access. Daniel nodded slowly. All right. One more thing, Voss said. Why didn't you say anything sooner? You've been working in that yard for 2 years. You must have known this program was falling apart. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Nobody asked, he said. And a mop bucket doesn't come with a security clearance for opinions. Voss did not smile, exactly, but something in her face loosened, the particular expression of a person recognizing a truth they didn't especially want to hear. Over the following 10 days, Daniel walked the Halcyon Ridge from bow to stern with a tablet, a flashlight, and the quiet, unglamorous focus of a man doing the only kind of work he had ever fully respected. He found the misaligned coupling had not been an isolated mistake, it was a pattern. He found 3 fuel line junctions that had been serviced with a torque spec 15% below manufacturer tolerance, likely to save time on a maintenance contract billed by the hour. He found a backup coolant pump that had been certified operational, despite a documented vibration anomaly that should have triggered an automatic replacement order. He found, buried in a maintenance log dated 8 months earlier, a service note flagging exactly the intake valve alignment issue that had grounded the ship, followed by a second entry 3 days later, marking the issue as resolved, with no corresponding work order, no parts requisition, and no technician's signature. Someone had closed out a critical safety flag without doing the work. Daniel brought this finding to a man named Peter Okafor, a Navy liaison engineer who had worked alongside Meridian's team for the past year, and who had, in that time, developed the specific tired posture of a man who has reported problems that went nowhere. I've seen that entry before, Okafor admitted, when Daniel showed him the log. I flagged it to Ashcroft's office in April, never heard back. You have that in writing? I have the email. Can I see it? Okafor looked at him for a long moment, the way a man looks at another man he is deciding whether to trust with something that could end his career. Why do you care this much? Okafor asked. You're a maintenance contractor. Nobody would blame you for staying quiet. Daniel thought about Mia, asleep at home, thought about the 6 years he'd spent making sure this exact kind of failure could never happen, thought about the 200 mechanics who'd spent 4 days chasing a problem because the actual cause had been quietly buried in a log entry nobody wanted to reopen. Because I built this thing to work, Daniel said. And it's not supposed to almost get people killed because somebody didn't want to pay for a part. Okafor sent him the email that afternoon. Daniel compiled everything into a report exactly the way Voss had asked, methodical, unembellished, each finding supported by a photograph, a measurement, or a document. He did not editorialize. He did not accuse anyone by name in the body of the report. He simply laid out what he had found, in order, the way a man lays bricks, one at a time, until the wall is undeniable. He submitted it to Voss on a Friday morning, 10 days after the rubber band had held an engine sealed together long enough to save a $70 million sea trial. Voss read it twice, the first time quickly, absorbing the shape of it. The second time, slowly, line by line, the way a person reads a document when they are no longer looking for information, but trying to fully understand the weight of what it means. When she finished, she sat for a long moment in her office, alone, looking at the harbor through her window, at the Halcyon Ridge sitting quiet at the dock, its hull catching the gray morning light. She picked up her phone and called an emergency session of the program review board. Gordon Ashcroft arrived at the review board meeting the following Tuesday with the same confidence he brought to every meeting. A leather folio under one arm, a presentation loaded and ready, prepared to explain, in his particular rounded corporate language, exactly why the Halcyon Ridge's troubles had been minor, isolated, and already resolved. He did not know Daniel Reyes would be in the room. He did not know Okafor would be in the room either, sitting quietly near the back with a printed email in a folder on his lap. He did not know that Voss had spent the weekend on the phone with the Navy's program office, nor that she had spent Monday afternoon in a much longer conversation with Meridian's founder, a woman named Constance Whitfield, who had built the company 30 years earlier on a reputation for engineering rigor and had watched, in recent years, from a mostly ceremonial board seat as that reputation quietly eroded under executives more interested in margins than in ships. Whitfield sat at the head of the table that morning, silent, watching. Ashcroft began his presentation the way he began all of them. "Thank you all for making time," he said. "I want to walk through the resolution timeline on the Halcyon Ridge propulsion incident and reassure everyone that this was a contained maintenance anomaly, already corrected, with no bearing on the broader fleet order." He clicked to his first slide. Clean bullet points, reassuring language. The word optimized appeared within the first minute. "Our engineering team identified a minor calibration drift in the fuel intake assembly," he continued. "It was addressed on site, and the vessel has since passed a full ignition sequence with no further incident. I'd characterize this as a routine maintenance event, well within normal operational variance." Voss let him finish. Then she said, "Who addressed it?" Ashcroft blinked. "Our engineering team, as I said." "Which engineer performed the fix?" "I'd have to check the specific work order." "You don't need to check," Voss said. "I have it here." She placed a single sheet on the table, turned it so Ashcroft could read it. It was not a work order. It was a photograph, taken by one of the Navy liaison staff during the original incident, of a rubber band wound twice around a fuel coupling housing. "This is what fixed your ship," Voss said. "Temporarily. Long enough to get through the ignition test you're currently describing as routine engineering resolution. It was applied by a dockyard maintenance contractor named Daniel Reyes, who happens to be the man who originally designed that fuel delivery system, before your company terminated his entire engineering team to cut costs." The room went still. Ashcroft's mouth opened, then closed. "I think there's been some confusion about the sequence of events." "There's no confusion," Voss said. "I have his full technical report. I have a maintenance log entry from 8 months ago that flagged this exact fault, and a second entry 3 days later closing it out with no work order and no technician signature. I have an email from your own Navy liaison engineer sent to your office in April, warning that the flag had been closed without remediation. I'd like you to explain that." Ashcroft looked at Okafor, who did not look away. "I'll need to review my records," Ashcroft said, and his voice had lost the smooth, rounded quality it carried at the start of the meeting. It had gone thin. "You had 10 days, Voss said. "I gave you every opportunity to bring this forward yourself." Constance Whitfield spoke for the first time that morning. "Gordon," she said quietly, "did you know your engineering team had been reduced to a subcontracted staff with no direct experience on this platform's original design?" "That decision was made to meet cost targets set by the board," Ashcroft said. "It was a business decision, not a technical one." "It became a technical one," Whitfield said, "the moment it put an engine at risk of failing in front of a Navy admiral during a trial that determines the fate of an 11-ship order. Did you know a safety flag on this exact fault had been closed without remediation?" Ashcroft did not answer right away, and the silence answered for him. The particular kind of silence that settles over a room when a confident man runs out of things to say that are also true. "I believe," he said finally, "that the closure may have been an administrative oversight, handled by junior staff without my direct—" "Your signature is on the original staffing reduction memo," Whitfield said, "and your name is on the safety flag distribution list that received the April email. I've had legal review both this morning." She looked at him for a long moment, the way a founder looks at someone who has quietly worn away at something she built. "You're suspended, effective immediately, pending a full compliance review," Whitfield said. "Security will escort you from the building." Ashcroft did not argue. There was, by that point, nothing left to argue with. He gathered his folio with hands that were not quite steady, and the 2 security staff waiting near the door walked him out without a word being exchanged, and the room watched him go the way rooms watch these things, quietly, without triumph, just a kind of settling, like a house exhaling after a door finally closes. Voss turned back to the table once he was gone. "I'd like to bring in Daniel Reyes," she said, to Whitfield and the rest of the board. "Not as a contractor, as Chief Propulsion Engineer for the Halcyon Ridge program, reporting directly to program oversight, with full authority over technical sign-off going forward." Whitfield nodded slowly. "Agreed. Have him come in." Daniel was waiting in the hallway outside, in a collared shirt he'd bought 2 days earlier because he didn't own one that felt right for a boardroom, sitting with the particular stillness of a man who has learned not to expect good news from rooms like this one. When Voss opened the door and asked him to come in, he stood and walked into the boardroom and took the seat she offered him at the table, in the exact spot where Ashcroft's folio had been sitting 11 minutes earlier. "Mr. Reyes," Whitfield said, "I understand you designed the original propulsion system for this class." "I helped design it," Daniel said, "with a team, all 4 of us." "Where's the rest of your team now?" "Scattered," he said. "One's teaching community college now. One's in Texas doing something unrelated. One retired early." Whitfield nodded, filing this away with the expression of a woman already making a mental list. "We'd like to offer you the chief engineer contract on this program," she said. "Full authority, full compensation befitting the role, and frankly, an apology that's about 2 years overdue." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "I appreciate that," he said. "I do. But I have a daughter. She's 9. I've missed enough mornings and enough dinners in my life chasing jobs that didn't respect that. If I take this, I need it understood up front that I'm not doing 60-hour weeks and I'm not doing last-minute travel." "That can be arranged," Whitfield said, "and I'd want the ability to bring my old team back, if they're willing. Not because I can't do this alone, because I built this system with them, and if you want it maintained right, you want people who actually understand what they're maintaining." Voss watched him say this with the particular attention of someone recalculating an impression she'd already revised twice that week. "Done," Whitfield said. "Anything else?" Daniel considered it. "I want the authority to close a safety flag myself, in writing, with my name on it," he said. "Not delegate it, not leave it open for somebody to quietly close later without doing the work. If my name's on a fix, it means the fix happened." "That," Whitfield said, "is exactly the kind of thing that should have been standard practice a long time ago." The board approved the terms without further discussion. 3 months later, the Halcyon Ridge completed a full sea trial without incident. Every subsystem performed within tolerance. The 11 remaining ships in the fleet order moved forward under a revised maintenance oversight structure that required an engineer's direct sign-off, not a contractor's, on any safety flag closure, a policy that had been drafted personally by Daniel Reyes and approved without amendment by Constance Whitfield. Daniel's old teammates came back one at a time. The community college teacher took a leave of absence to return for 6 months and never quite left after that. The one in Texas needed some convincing, mostly in the form of Daniel calling him at 10 at night and saying simply, "It's fixable now. Come help me fix it." He came. Peter Okafor was promoted to lead Navy liaison for the entire propulsion program, a role that came with an office that had a window, which he pointed out to Daniel more than once with visible satisfaction. Gordon Ashcroft's compliance review concluded 4 weeks after his suspension. He did not return to Meridian Defense Dynamics in any capacity, and the terms of his departure were not made public, though the industry had a way of knowing these things regardless, and it was widely understood that no defense contractor in the region would be hiring him again anytime soon. Daniel kept his old locker in the dry dock building for the first several weeks, out of habit more than necessity, and he still occasionally picked up a mop out of some private stubbornness that made the younger engineers on his new team laugh, though they stopped laughing the first time they watched him diagnose a compression fault in 90 seconds flat, using nothing but his hands and the 11 years of instinct he'd never actually lost, just set down for a while. On a Friday evening in late autumn, Voss found him in the engine bay of the second hull in the fleet order, running a final diagnostic before the following week's trial. The bay was quiet, most of the crew gone for the day, the harbor outside going gold and then gray as the sun dropped behind the cranes. "You're here late," she said. "Wanted to double-check the coupling torque myself," Daniel said. "Old habit." "You don't trust your own team?" "I trust them completely," he said. "Doesn't mean I don't check anyway." Voss leaned against the hull, watching him work for a moment in the particular comfortable silence that had developed between them over the past 3 months, the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. "Mia wanted to know if the Admiral lady is coming to her school thing next week," Daniel said, not looking up from his work. "She's decided you're interesting, says you probably know a lot about ships." Voss allowed herself something close to a smile. "I know a fair amount about ships, yes. It's a geography presentation, state capitals. She's very confident about Sacramento." "I'll clear my schedule," Voss said. Daniel finished his check, wiped his hands on a rag, and looked up at the readouts glowing steady and green along the bay wall, the same readouts that, months earlier, had flatlined in front of 200 mechanics who couldn't explain why. "She's running clean," he said. "No misalignment, no shortcuts, every seal where it should be." He said it plainly, the way he said most things, without any particular weight in his voice. But Voss understood, standing there in the quiet of the dry dock with the harbor going dark outside, that he wasn't only talking about the ship,